So this is going to be a longer segment because there's so much to know about computers. Unless you are old school and like the idea of recording on an analog console and storing your output on tape, you will need a computer to house your virtual recording system, or DAW. Even if you're going the analog route, you would still need a computer to convert your tracks into the digital format everyone is using today to stream their music. A computer is the first mandatory piece of equipment you will need to build your home recording studio. As with all of the equipment we'll be covering in this course, there are many options to choose from when it comes to a computer. Your first choice will be to decide whether you want to work on an Apple Macintosh or a PC. Apple computers have always been favored by creative artists because they do most of the internal setup work for you, leaving you more time to devote to being creative. Their operating systems are usually very smooth and painless and have great tools for getting things done. The downside of a Mac, besides the cost, is that you have limited configuration options. Apple builds your machine for you, and that's the end of it. With PCs, you have an almost unlimited ability to set up your machine. The configuration options are only limited by the available technology and your budget. If you're into rolling up your sleeves and building your computer exactly the way you want it, then PCs are probably the way to go. These days, both Macs and PCs are extremely powerful machines. They will both accomplish everything you need to do as a creative artist recording your music. As far as cost is concerned, Macs are typically more expensive than PCs. I have a hard time justifying how much money one has to plop down to own an Apple device. However, I do appreciate how easy it is to get up and running on one. When you're just starting out though, money is a concern for many, and for that reason, a PC might be your best bet. Next, we need to talk about processors. There are several components in a computer that determine how powerful it is. First is the processor, or CPU, Central Processing Unit. This is the chip that, as its name implies, does all of the heavy lifting when it comes to processing the information you pass to it. It contains the operating system, which contains all of the instructions your computer needs to use to do that processing. The more powerful the processor is, the faster your computer can think and complete tasks using that instruction set. Computers these days have a processing speed of between 3.5 and 4.2 gigahertz. Gigahertz is a unit of frequency that is equal to 1 billion hertz. 1 hertz is equal to 1 cycle per second. 1 cycle is equal to 1 pulse of the processor, which synchronizes and completes a single operation. This is known as the computer's clock rate. So a 3.5 gigahertz processor can complete 3.5 billion operations a second. That's a lot of stuff going on in an instant. While an audio workstation doesn't have a ton of moving parts, and therefore doesn't really require the speed of, say, a scientific research facility, or even a graphic-intensive application like Adobe Premiere, which also utilizes a graphics card for some of its operations, speed is important for latency. Latency is the delay between an incoming signal and the time it takes to process that signal within the computer. Higher latency becomes an issue when you're singing and your voice comes back through your headphones a bunch of milliseconds after you sang it. The same is true for keyboards or drums or anything that is played and then reproduced in your monitors or headphones. It can really mess you up if the delay is long enough. For that reason alone, you need a fast computer. But you don't need to break the bank buying the latest supersonic gamer computer with all the whistles and bells. The lower range 3.5 gigahertz machines should be just fine. When you start recording 110-piece orchestras and are miking each instrument, then you might want to consider a faster machine. The next component in a computer that you need to consider is the memory. This is known as RAM, or random access memory. There are several flavors of RAM out there, but this is all taken care of for you when you buy a pre-built machine. As I mentioned earlier, if you're into tinkering with the components in your computer, then a PC is the way to go. In that case, there are many articles out there providing detailed information on the different types of RAM and on every component in a computer's system. Go for it! But for most of us, a pre-built machine is the way to go. You'll need to choose how much RAM you want for your system. For audio, if you're only recording a few tracks and are not bringing in a large sample library, which for our purposes at this point is true, then you could get away with only 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you are looking at getting an older used system, then this might be an option. All of the newer systems, however, come with a minimum of 16 gigabytes of RAM. And this is much preferable. It allows more flexibility when you decide to start recording more tracks, or if you decide to use some of the amazing sample libraries that are available. I would say that you should get as much RAM as your budget will allow. If you're only able to afford 8 gig, then do it. You gotta start somewhere. FYI, PCs have slots on their motherboards that allow you to increase the amount of RAM at a later point. While some Macs allow you to upgrade the memory at a later point, others have the RAM built directly into the processor chip and are not upgradable. You'll need to find out if the Mac you are interested in buying has upgradable memory. Next, you need to save your work somewhere, and that somewhere is known as a storage drive. You can save to a flash or thumb drive or an SD card, but I don't recommend that. The amount of audio and project files you'll need to save for your projects will eat up a smaller storage device faster than a dog eating your dinner when you aren't looking. That is to say, very quickly. It's so easy to underestimate how much storage space you need. I recommend that you get 2 external drives with a minimum of 128 gigabytes on each. A gigabyte is 1 billion bytes. I have 2 terabyte drives that I'm using to save files and backups, and I wonder if that might run out at some point. A terabyte, by the way, is a trillion bytes. To give you some perspective, a 1-page Word document is approximately 1 kilobytes, or 1,000 bytes. 1 minute of an MP3 audio file is approximately 1 megabyte, or 1,000,000 bytes. 1 minute of a standard industry WAV file is 4.92 megabytes, or 492 million bytes. Given that, you can store around 2,601 5-minute songs on a 128 gig hard drive. That may seem like a lot of songs, but believe me when I tell you that for each song you record, you will have many versions of that song along with many project files stored. If you're like most of us, you will likely be storing other files on that drive as well. And for each hard drive you have with working files on it, you need another drive of equal size to store a backup of those working files. You don't want to lose everything if one drive goes out. Hence, the 2 drives. You should be doing a backup weekly, if not more often. You don't want to lose all of your projects and music because something evil happened to your working drive, and it does happen. Yes, your computer will come with its own hard drive, but I wouldn't store my audio and project files on that. That drive contains system files that your computer and all your installed programs need to run. It's better not to share that space with your precious music projects. You need to have a separate drive for your creative projects. This also allows you to detach the drive from your computer and take it elsewhere if you need to. The 2 types of drives you need to consider are HDDs and SSDs. HDDs, or hard disk drives, are the traditional hard drives computers have used up to recently. They have moving heads that read and write information to spinning platters. These mechanical devices are susceptible to errors if they are bumped, and because they contain moving parts that wear out over time, have a shorter lifespan. On the plus side, they are cheaper and easier for data recovery if damaged. SSDs, or solid-state drives, use newer technology to store data on instantly accessible memory chips. SSDs are faster, quieter, smaller, more durable, and consume less energy. These are quickly becoming the drives of choice, and although nominally more expensive, are my recommendation when you are looking to purchase a drive. Now, I was going to cover this later on when we discuss DAWs, but since it is very relevant to the size of storage devices you will be purchasing, I thought it might be better if I discussed this right after the topic of storage devices. To know how much space an audio file can take up on your drive, you must first understand a little bit about sampling rates and bit depths. I know, we're getting techie here. but it explains why audio files can eat up a hard drive space quickly. So let's take a look at the terms used to describe the digital information being stored. The sampling rate is the number of digital slices of sound, or samples, captured in a single second. The bit depth, or bit rate, is the number of bits of information stored in each sample. One of the more important aspects of the bit rate is that it defines the dynamic range, measured in dB or decibels, of the sample. Since the industry converted over to digital, they have used a sample rate of 44.1K and a bit depth of 16 bits as a standard, or red book. 44.1K was selected because humans can hear, on average, of up to around 20K. To adequately represent an audio recording, the frequency of the recording must be twice that of average human hearing, or 40K. This is known as the Nyquist-Shannon theorem. You're welcome. The decision to make 44.1K the standard allows the sample rate to be over twice the top range of human hearing, which provides a very accurate reproduction of the audio. A bit depth of 16 was selected because it can store a dynamic range of up to 96 dB, which is the top of the hearing range of the average human ear. But we're never satisfied with normal. We always have to go further. With faster computers and larger capacity storage devices being introduced every 5 minutes, we're now starting to record at higher precisions. Typically now, engineers are recording at 48K. Or even 96K sampling rates, and bit depths of 24 or 32 bits. This provides a greater frequency range and perceived volume in the recording. The goal is to provide greater clarity and a more realistic listening experience. Just how far we can go with this, I'm not sure, but I will say that the digital recordings from the 80s and 90s sound much more brittle than the recordings being offered today, so there is some justification to going further. Of course, with an increased bandwidth and bit depths come larger files. This is why you need to think about larger storage devices. Here's where it gets a bit techy. You can opt out of this section here if you were calculation challenged, but really it is an interesting breakdown of how file sizes are determined based upon the sample rate and the bit depth. Let's say we have an audio file that is 3 minutes long, the average size of a pop song. That's 180 seconds. We will use the old studio standard of 44.1K and 16 bits. The calculation would be to multiply the sample rate by the bit depth, and then multiply that by the length of the song, 180 seconds. That result is the number of bits. Since file size is measured in bytes, we need to divide that result by 8 to turn it into bytes. So the calculation looks like this. We have file size equaling sample rate times bit depth times song length in seconds divided by 8. So if you have 44.1K 16-bit song for 180 seconds, the file size is going to be 14,760,000 bytes, or 14.76 megabytes. For one song!